Hello, and welcome to She Leads Biotech, the podcast that celebrates women leaders in the bioscience space. I'm your host, Sharon Cox, CEO and Managing Director of CNA International, based right here in New York. And each week I'll be talking to women leaders about their work, their triumphs and challenges, providing invaluable insight into how women can unlock their superpowers and succeed on their own terms. So whether you're navigating your own career path in bioscience or you're passionate about science and innovation, I hope you're empowered and inspired by each episode.
My guest today is a versatile marketing professional who brings her expertise to the bioscience space as Global Market Development Manager in cell and gene therapy. She's also founder of Her Collective, a community-driven organization where women can feel supported, encouraged, and elevated to embrace their full potential. And as if that isn't enough, she's super passionate about women's health. Lots to unpack today. So let's get into it. Please join me in welcoming Alyssa Waid. Hey, Alyssa, how are you?
Great. How are you?
I am very well. I have to say, I'm glad that it's coming to the end of a week.
I can agree on that. What a busy one.
Yes, happy Friday, coming into the weekend. Yes. You're over in Michigan, right?
Yes, Michigan. Very cool.
Michigan. Well, yeah, it's pretty cold here in New York as well. So, hopefully, let's keep our fingers crossed for some nicer weather. Me being British, I'll chat about the weather all day long. But we've got way more important things to talk about. So I think we can cut that bit there. Now, you're in your career, you're in marketing, right?
Yes.
But this big part to your story. So you're in marketing and you're in the cell and gene therapy space.
Correct.
And I know that we met at the Advanced Therapies Week in Dallas, and you were all over the place. You were on roundtables and panels and a TV. Looked like a beginning of a TV game show that was going on there on the panel that you were on. And you were talking very eloquently and very passionately about women's health.
Yes.
But you don't currently work in women's health. So what's sparked your passion? How are you able to speak so passionately about that topic?
Definitely. I think I'm able to speak so passionately because the passion was sparked from my own journey with my own personal health. So navigating the world of birth control, women's health, going to your regular gynecologist checkups, doing all of those things, I was experiencing a lot of period pain, irregular periods. And what I found is when I would talk to my doctors, some of them would gaslight me, or that's how it felt. You go in with this problem and you're wanting to be heard. You're wanting to, consult your doctor, the expert, for how do you navigate this. And a lot of times you're kind of turned down, or it's not that serious, or you're being hysterical. I even had a doctor at one point ask me, "Do you want something to be wrong with you?" And I was kind of taken back by it because I said, "No, I don't. But I feel like because XYZ, these problems that I'm having, that there is something going on that I just don't know because I'm not the medical doctor here."
And you are the expert.
Yeah. So that happening, I kind of took a step back and started to just do my own research, read some books, and try to figure out, what was going on. And in doing so, I learned a lot about the world of women's health, just in terms of, general statistics about women not being included in clinical trials until 1993. Learning just the disparities in funding for things like PCOS and endometriosis, which affect 10% or more of women. And so through that, I started to gain a little bit of female rage, if you will, and being like, what is going on? These are important issues that are happening and need to be addressed. But there really wasn't the power or the funding being put behind that to do that. So within my own personal journey with it, I started to just, educate myself and learn about the importance of advocating for oneself with your doctors, knowing what to kind of ask for and what to look for. And then that's just made me kind of get on a soapbox about it and want to share with anybody. And I'm the friend in the group that if somebody says, this was said, I'm like, have you looked into this? Have you told your doctor this? Just because I think it's so important for women to be educated on their bodies, educated on their options. And honestly, in my generation, I'm seeing there's been a huge move away from birth control. But I think what needs to be changed with the narrative is options. Women need to have options. They need to be educated on what those options are, and be empowered to choose what's best for them in their lifestyle. So all that being said, that's what's led me to be really geared up and passionate about trying to make change in women's health and be part of that atmosphere, if you will.
And the thing is, because as women, we know when something's not right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure that men know when something's not right, but they very rarely do anything about it. And but we do. And yet, if it isn't immediately obvious to a medical professional, then it's put back on us to almost prove it. Well, what is wrong with you? Prove what it is that's wrong with you. And then we'll go and look into that, which is incredulous to me. I cannot fathom how that is. But I've had situations like that myself in my life, and almost been made to feel that I'm some hysterical woman, who, as you say, is almost going in there wanting something to be wrong. So I'm thrilled that, particularly with your generation of questioning and being more aware. I have a daughter probably about the same age as you, and her friends have all moved away from the pill and that kind of oral contraception because of the issues and the problems and everything that's come up. And I have to say, I was so excited. One of my guests has a product that is non-hormones. It's got nothing. And you take it out in a little packet. She actually did a demonstration as part of the podcast. And you take it, it's like a little tampon, really, is what it looks like.
Yeah.
And it's just a gel, and you use the gel 20 minutes before. And that's it.
Nice. I'm excited about that episode then.
Right.
I had many things to see come out, and I'm actually embarrassed to admit this, but I didn't even know some of the facts about my own cycle until I was probably 23, and I had to sit down with a naturopathic doctor, and she told me about luteal phase and follicular phase. I just thought I had a period, roughly every 30 days. But that's so much more to your hormone cycle and your moods and all of that during that time. And I have seen a huge uptick in people my age starting to be more aware of that. And I think that's a great step. Is I think
Definitely.
all in all is education. And to what you're saying is actually hysteria. There's a book that I recently have been reading called It's Not Hysteria. And it talks about how women's health and a lot of the misconceptions today are based in this because back in the 1800s, I mean, I'll have to fact check myself on that, but there used to be a disease, if you will, that they would give to women and say that they were hysterical, and it would be related to hormones or their periods or cramps or whatever it was having. And so now coming forward to today, pain is very much normalized in women's health. And they don't do male birth control because there's so many side effects. Well, it's the same side effects that women have in birth control. It's just we're tougher or we're able to handle it. It's so interesting. So yeah, it's an exciting time. And I think the most important part is just educating oneself, but also bringing men and other women into the fold to just be empowered to know the information.
Absolutely. Yeah. So many things happening in the women's health space. So I look forward to following you because I know you'll be at the forefront of it. And another area that you're involved in, and I think it all kind of blends in, it started life as a blog, I believe, and has grown into a community-based organization which is for women, right? And is it Her Collective?
Her Collective, yeah.
So tell me about that.
Yeah, so it did start as my own personal blog when I was in college. As college students do, I was working on building my own portfolio, my own marketing portfolio there. So I started blogging as a way to do that. And then in that journey, at first, I didn't necessarily take it that seriously, but I started to find my niche, if you will. And I had a few friends that, I don't know, I was going through some things and they went through some things. And so I started just encouraging them to honestly take pictures. We went on a study abroad trip and the girls are very nervous. They didn't want to be behind the camera. And I was like, you are in France. Like, send it to your mom. You got to get behind the camera. Just have fun with it. So we were doing fun girly photo shoots throughout the trip. And I just remember at the end of one of the trips, a girl told me, you should write a book on women empowerment. And that's when like a switch really clicked for me. So up until then, I was doing kind of fashion, culture, a more influencery type posts. And I thought, that's interesting. So I started to write a posts that were a little bit more focused on life and mental health and just personal journey. And I remember one of the posts being about quitting and why sometimes quitting is okay and to walk away from things that are no longer serving you mentally, physically, whatever it might be. And that was my first viral post, if you will. Um, Viral to me is just more than my grandma and my mom liking it. It was like 300 shares on Facebook, 500 plus views. So it really went off for me. And I thought, wow, this is an area people are interested in. So that's where the blogging kind of started. And then as I got into my career, got very busy, I actually started to have multiple writers contributing to the blog to just bring in a bit more of a diverse perspective.
Yeah.
And through that, we, just kind of one day said, we should do a women empowerment conference. And that's what we did. So in 2019, we hosted 2 women empowerment conferences in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Both were very successful. I mean, they were smaller conferences. But that was when I guess another switch had changed for me of just thinking, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to create. Because you see women coming together in these areas, and people after the event were like, I met my best friend there. I got a job from meeting this person there. And it was just seeing those connections happen in real life that really kept me going and thought, this is what I want to create with her collective. So bringing it to today, pandemic was a little bit of a weird time for events. So that kind of fell short for a bit. But now we've been mostly doing in-person events. So that's where a lot of our focus is today is events in the Michigan area, doing book clubs and meetups, women conference, one-day conferences. So that's kind of where it's been. We haven't been doing as much of the content side, but that is an area that as I've become more passionate about things like women's health, that I would like to build back up.
Yeah, I was going to say, where are you going? Because I know it's in Michigan. Do you have plans to go global or to certainly different states, or have you kind of thought that far ahead?
Yeah, so I mean global would be very awesome, but I think something that I do want to keep somewhat niche is with the events is you see in these big cities in Los Angeles and New York and Paris, they do huge events like this. And there's a few companies that I admire that are doing that, like Create and Cultivate, if you've heard of that one. Very exciting. And so I think that's great. But my goal with her collective is to bring that to the Midwest because I feel like there's not as much of that. I feel like in those big cities, there's a lot of opportunity, which is great, but
Yeah.
kind of creating that pod, if you will, or that hub in the Midwest is my first goal. Of course, if it goes beyond that, then I would be very happy. But I think it's also important to have focus on the Midwest and bring that to maybe the regular woman, the one that might not be working in the New York office or the one that might not be an LA, Hollywood girl. So it's kind of having that more normal Midwest feel. But beyond that, I also want to have more focus on bringing in experts and, to the point, like I shared with women's health and getting involved with CGT. My goal is to create a platform where if I'm not the expert on it, then I want to be elevating women that are and sharing their stories as business owners, as doctors, as therapists, to get that information out to other women that it could help.
And is the collective only for women's health, or is it in a specific sector, or is it for women in any walk of life?
I would say women in any walk of life. I mean, my target audience falls between like, post college to maybe mid 30s. But also, I say, if something resonates with you, if something resonates with you, please be part of it. There's nothing saying you can't be.
Anything I think of that's about old people, I'll bring that along to include.
And I mean, not to bring it back to women's health, but I was going to say there's plenty that needs to be discussed with menopause and, friendship beyond your teens and getting older, if you will. So there is a time and conversation for everything. And, I've done a lot of thinking and soul searching, if you will, of what do I want it to be? Do I want a niche into CGT? Do I want a niche into women's health? But I think what at my core, my importance is really just empowering women. And I think there's power in bringing women from different industries and different groups and backgrounds together that can help drive us forward. Because you never know what you might need to get your idea further. Having that diverse perspective and diverse group, I think, helps do that.
And the challenges are pretty much still the same, right?
Yeah.
We all kind of have this common area of what challenges we face as women.
Yep. And there's a story that I'll share from one of our events that we've done. So I do something called a book swap. So if you've ever heard of a swap meet, it's kind of a similar thing, but for books. So I host those locally.
And mine went a whole different direction there, but that's
One of my favorite memories from one of those, though, as there was a woman that came in and she brought a whole bag of doula books about, how to be a doula, studying. I don't know what the correct term for being a doula is, but beyond that, she brought all of these educational books and dropped them. And I thought, okay, I don't know who's going to really pick those up. But somebody came in and a girl is so excited. She said, I've been training to be a doula. I've been looking for resources. And they ended up connecting. And she took all of those books and she was in the right place, right time that she needed that. And so I think that's why it's important. It can be good to niche and have a really specific sector, but you never know what people are looking for and the connections that can be made when it is a little bit more broad.
totally. And I think, again, it's the important theme of that should be that connection. And, what is one woman's challenge is another woman's solution who has maybe been there and seen it and stuff like that. So with all of this, you've got a strong background in marketing and in community building. What excites you about bringing all of these together within the biotech space?
Yeah. So sometimes I get a little bit of imposter syndrome when I think about, what am I going to do in biotech or what am I going to do in women's health? Because I don't come from a clinical background and I don't come from a technical background. I don't work in a lab. So sometimes I try to check myself of like, what do I know? But what I do know is being able to be a connector and a storyteller. And there is importance in marketing. And I remember a conversation that I had with an old colleague who she was an R&D scientist. And she actually said, we're doing the work in the lab, but we need somebody who's sitting at the right tables to bring that information forward and market that and share that story and tell it in the right way that we're able to get the funding or we're able to get the, I guess, power behind something to move it forward. And that really resonated with me and made me rethink my imposter syndrome of, I can bring something to this. And so my goal is to be able to, as my personal self, advocate for women and advocate for biotech, but also bringing the right people to the table and, helping build community. I think that's so important, not only in biotech, but, thinking about an industry that can be potentially male dominant. I think it's important to have communities, not of just women, but women that can get together and, say, hey, I know somebody I can connect you with, or you have a product idea, but you need the funding, I know these two people. So I think the community aspect, I am good at that. And I want to be able to bring that and help advocate and elevate the right voices into the right rooms.
Yeah. And I think, again, that's so important, particularly in the bioscience space, because sometimes, and this comes into the funding and investment somewhere that, I've talked to people who've got great science and their products amazing, but they can't sell it. The story that it's the best funding and everything appears to come from those people who can craft the story and get people excited and get people wanting to know more. And that's how that moves through. And I see where marketing fits in within the bio space because it's so important that those stories can be told, because so many of them are really, they're not tangible because it's research, right? So it's like, this is the potential that it has, but what we can't say that that's what it's going to do. This is what we're striving towards, and having that ability to take people on that journey with you.
Yeah.
That's where I see the importance of a role like yours.
Yep. And I think also something that stood out to me, I attended an event, a meeting on the Mesa last year. And I think even conveying what's happening in our ecosystem of biotech beyond biotech, because there was a funny conversation at a networking event where there was a marketing agency, which as a marketer in the industry, I kind of cringed at this, but I'll share the story because I think it just goes to show how important it is to storytell and share even beyond your own walls that you're used to. But there's a marketing agency there and they were kind of chatting with people and trying to be a little bit salesy. And one of the younger marketers was like, "So, is there a cure to cancer?" And it's like a table of cancer scientists or therapeutic developers. And it's just like, yeah, that's what we're doing here. That's the whole point. So it's funny to think that, we get into this community and think, we're moving forward, which is we are. But I think, sometimes from the outside, the normal person doesn't even know what's happening in biotech and what some of the great advancements are. I think being able to, I guess, be a normal person or be a marketing person that can share those stories, I think is so important.
We talked about the community with her collective. Where do you see the difference and the need for community for women within the biotech space?
Yeah, I've recently been participating in a lot of the Women in Advanced Therapies events, which have been great. And what I see from that is, Becky Johnson with Wyatt, she shared interesting statistic. I don't remember the exact number, but basically, um, you know, investors are not investing in women, female founders as much as they are in male founders. So that's just one area. Obviously, we need to continue advocating and elevating women to step into those roles, but also putting pressure on those venture capitalists and those investors to trust and invest in women-owned businesses and women startups. And so that's just one element. But I think through continued advocacy and building community to like rally around those ideas is super important because I think we can move the needle much further. Once again, when we get the right people in the room to say, hey, this needs to change and this thing needs to happen. So I think it's so important for female founders and even just women getting into leadership roles. To share a little bit about my background in global marketing at Thermo Fisher, my chain of command all the way up is all women. So I feel very honored to be in a company that supports, women in leadership. But I think what I found in that is that what women are really good at is nurturing relationships and bringing other women to the top with them. And if you're not one of those women, you need to be, because I think it's so important that when another woman moves on in Thermo Fisher, what I see happening is she says, hey, I know somebody that's good for this role. And how I even got into this was one of my old colleagues, who's a female, brought me in and said, hey, I have a role for you. And so I think those connections like that are how we're going to be able to make progress is, I hope systematically things change or culturally that we're more accepting that women can and will do what they want to do and they're capable. But I also think as women in biotech and where community can be really important is through those connections and through bringing other women up with you when you are being elevated to those higher seats and those bigger tables, if you will.
Right. And again, kind of going back a little bit on what we were saying before, with the importance of storytelling, I would say even more importantly for women startups, women founders, a number of whom have come from the bench and taken the science route. Your experience as a marketer, have you experienced a lack of experience? I keep saying word experience, but of women able to tell these stories. And is there maybe a training? I'm not suggesting suddenly everybody becomes an amazing salesperson or something like that, but that element of women understanding how to tell a story. You being around so many of these women, do you see that, or are they there with that and they're able to do that and still people are not listening right now?
I think it depends. I think it is, the same colleague that I had talked with about the importance of having like the marketing side because she came from R&D. there is I think a balance between the two, especially in an industry like this, because this industry values data and the facts. So from the marketing side, we have to be conscious that, we're not just doing airy photos and silly memes. Like, we have to be serious and it has to be true. So I think there's a very important relationship that can happen between the scientist or the R&D team and the marketer to make sure that the information and the things being told, the stories being told, are in truth and scientifically accurate. So I do think it's a relationship between the two. I don't know. That's a really good question, though, to think about, of how, there could be potential training for those coming from the bench to be a little bit better about how they can convey that. I think, to what I mentioned before about even my own imposter syndrome, I think that's something that a lot of women feel like, trying to, even if they have an idea, and maybe a lot of founders feel this way, so I guess I shouldn't generalize, but I know women experience it too. But, I have this idea, I'm doing this thing, but who am I to put it out into the world? Who's going to want to listen? And I think maybe the industry just isn't susceptible to it yet, but I do think that it's so important to just try to push through that discomfort and that voice in your head that's telling you can't, because I think if you have an idea, it's important. You have that idea for a reason. And fail by trying, if not, like, at least try to pursue it. I don't know if that fully answered the question, really. I think there is still some work that we can do as women to kind of squash our imposter syndrome and just say, hey, you know what? I do deserve to be at this table. I am capable, and believing that. And then, taking that and telling our story or pitching our ideas, because it is important.
And I don't, to be honest, I don't even know if there was a kind of real question in there. It's something that's zimming around in my head, of that correlation between selling, which is basically storytelling, and being able to, particularly in women's health, because if you're pitching to men within women's health, and those men are really not necessarily that interested in women's health things, that you need to pitch a story that makes sense. I mean, somebody that I was interviewing again for the podcast, she started her career as a salesperson, so it was a very natural thing for her. But she was telling, this is a woman who's raised over $500 million in funding. And she was telling me about her product and how she would go into investors and be very, well, let's talk about da da da. And then she was like, you know what? Nobody's listening to me. So she literally did a presentation and was like, hey, let's turn the lights down low. And we're going to talk about sex. And literally every man in the room went, sorry. And she just went for the jugular with it, with this is what we're selling. This is our product. This is what we believe in. And then she gave real, how would you feel if your wife had to do such and such and such and such, or when your wife isn't, or your girlfriend, or whoever, whatever you are, and literally went straight for here's the story. And she said to me, there was a board member that was at this meeting that was kind of like, I don't know whether to seriously praise you or fire you right now, because we don't know. But the funding came flooding in. It was incredible. I'm not suggesting that every woman goes out and does that, but I am trying to find a correlation between women who have that confidence of, despite the imposter syndrome, but actually have that such a belief in what their product is, what it is they're trying to achieve, and think about it from a sales pitch point of view, exactly like you would from a marketing point of view. And I'm sure that you do sales pitches and write them for. Is there something there in your professional experience? Is there something there that women would benefit from by doing that, having that?
Yeah, so one to two things of that story came up into my mind when you were telling that. But I was going to say that one is when you're going into a room or pitching to a group or whatever, a person, kind of knowing what's important to them or what will pique their interest. So to, shout out sex, then they'll be like, oh, whoa, okay, now I'm engaged. But thinking about what's important to them and what's going to get their attention, because yeah, in today's culture, so many people are distracted. Why would they listen to you? So I think it's trying to understand the room that you're going into and what will get their attention. And then specifically with women's health, where there could be a potential gap depending on your audience or a group of male investors, for example, is there might be an educational gap. And to that note of hysteria and women's gain, it's like re-educating on that too, which it seems silly because we might experience it. But I think there could be an opportunity for educating as well to just share the background. So maybe the presentation before you jump into this is exactly what I have, sharing the background of why that's important or the value that that brings or conveys, then having your pitch. So my two thoughts on that.
And is there a gap in women leadership of delivering that? Or in your experience, have they pretty much got that covered and that's great, and yet the funding still isn't coming out? I'm trying to find the correlation between where women aren't getting funding and what it is they're not doing that might help that. And I don't know if there is one. If I could find that correlation or if anybody could find that correlation, I don't know whether that would create one step further for women who are going out there looking for that investment to say, actually, this is a piece of my armor that I hadn't been using before. So I'm going to give that a go and try and use it.
Yeah. I think it's a great question. And I don't know the exact answer. I guess my assumptions would be a few different things that I think there is a potential education gap, but not from the side of women. I think a lot of these startup companies, specifically in women's health, are being founded by women because similar to my story, they go through something, they experience something, and they say, hey, I could do it better, or I had a solution for that. So I think there's passion behind it and what they want to share. But I think it's getting the right people's attention and having availability of funding. So there's a statistic out there somewhere that I think in 2017, the year might be off, but there was $37 million from NIH funding that went towards, I think it was smallpox research, which is a disease that's basically eradicated.
Yep.
But they're still putting funding towards that. Whereas only $27 million from NIH was given to like women's health research specific to PCOS and endometriosis. So I also think systematically, there's just disparities in the funding that might potentially be available. And then not to harp on the education point, but I think making those who aren't aware of the things happening in women's health aware of them and knowing that it is a real issue.
Yeah.
And I think continuing to rally around that. And I sometimes get wrapped up in my little world that I feel like, women empowerment is alive and well. But sometimes you step outside of that and you realize that really there's still so much work to be done.
Yeah.
So I think it's a culmination of those things of potential education gap and preconceived notions and taboos of what these investors think of women's health. And if it's hysteria or if it's made up. And then also I do think women struggle with imposter syndrome. So I think it's in both ways. Women can, go in and say, hey, this is what I want to do. But I think we also need the industry to also meet us there well, and bringing men into the fold, even the men in your life. I think sometimes it's easy as a passionate person to be like, okay, how can I boil the ocean? How can I save the world? And as much as we all want to do that, it's like, who are the immediate people in your circle that you could have an influence on? Or who are those connections that you do have in your network that maybe could help you elevate that? So I think that could be another aspect of, do you know a male investor in your network? And if you don't, is there somebody who can connect you with that? To just give you that background of what's important to you and what let me run my pitch by you, I think could be, a few different ideas.
So some great ideas to be considered and further conversations to be had. Anything that keeps the conversations going, right, is a good thing.
Yeah, I think it's important is continuing to talk about it, elevate it, and advocate for change where we can.
So my final question, 'cause I'm very conscious of your time. What advice would you give? And I don't even think this needs to be in biotech or anything because of your experience in, working with women, advocating for women. What one piece of advice that you could give to a younger woman now looking to make her way in the world and have control of her life? What advice could you give her?
There's so much. How much time do we have left? I think, I mean, not to be like funny because I feel like you see this advice everywhere, but is to really lean into your dreams and lean into your passions, those things that spark you. So it's my own journey with women's health made me passionate about women's health. I think there's something there. And so if you have something that sparks your interest or lights that fire within you, I think you should lean into that and don't be afraid of imposter syndrome. And I think the way to beat imposter syndrome is to just do it and not just steal advice, but it did stick with me is from that Advanced Therapies Week, Women in Advanced Therapies panel, somebody had said, don't try to be a man, be a woman. And I think that's just so important. As women, we're so great at nurturing, we're so great at relationship building, and we are capable and we have strengths. Taking that imposter syndrome note and just being a woman, I think lean into what's important to you, lean into your passions and don't give up on them. And I think, it will lead somewhere and little progress matters. And sometimes, once again, you get into the bigger picture and especially in the social media age, it's like you have to be this influencer or you have to be viral. And that's what makes you enough and important. And I think that is so untrue. What you're doing even on a small scale is so, so important. And leaning into that. And I think, one of my favorite analogies, if you are a social media user or if not, but is people say, even if you have 10 followers or 10 likes or whatever it is, if those 10 people were in the room with you saying like, I like what you're doing, keep going, that would be pretty empowering.
Yeah.
So I think just don't let trying to do it all and trying to conquer the world hold you back from doing a little thing. Just take action and believe in yourself and believe in your passion.
Great, great piece of advice. And finally, what about you? What's on the horizon for you, or where do you want to take all of this exciting things that you're doing? And where do you see Alyssa Waid in the next 5 years?
Oh, an even bigger question. Uh, no, I like to have a very full plate and I wear many hats in my personal life, in my work life. And so it's always a constant balance of like, what are my priorities? And I have to ask myself that question a lot. But, at the end of the day, I want to live a full life and I want to have an impact where I can, to my advice, even if it's a small impact, but women empowerment and women's health is what I've, kind of my hill that I'm going to die on, I guess, if you will, for a lack of a better analogy. But that's where I want to give my life and try to move the needle, even in the smallest way, and see progress there.
And telling the stories of women's health within the women's health. Keep telling those stories in the unique way that you do.
Yeah, using whatever platform I have, whether that's in biotech or through her collective or through my career at Thermo Fisher, I'm just continuing to share and elevate women and their stories and, hopefully see progress in that field and see more women in leadership.
Well, I've got no doubts whatsoever that that's exactly the road you're going to take. You command attention when you speak. I think it's incredible. And I've watched you. I saw you in Dallas on a number of things that you were doing, and people pay attention and people listen to what you say. And I think that's an amazing skill to have. So I wish you every success with the future of whatever you do. I'd love if ever I'm in Michigan. I'm terrible at geography, so I'm not entirely sure where Michigan is. But if I ever find myself there, I'll be sure to let you know. And obviously, if you find yourself in New York, then definitely give me a shout so we can move beyond a coffee and maybe share a cocktail.
That sounds great. And I also just want to say thank you for creating a platform to elevate, women in biotech and in other industries as well. I think it's so important. And these are the conversations and the things that need to be done to make those connections and help other women, know they're not alone, really.
No, it's a pleasure. And long may the show continue as long as I've got guests like you to come on and tell their story. Well, listen, Alyssa, have a fantastic weekend. And I hope it warms up a bit for you. I'm hoping it warms up a bit for us. And we'll be in touch again.
Sounds great. Thank you so
Same
much.
good chat. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. She Leads Biotech is brought to you by CNA International USA, a woman-owned boutique search firm based in New York. If you're looking to hire talent for your company or want support in achieving your career goals, please reach out to me at contact@cnaint.com. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And remember, the success of every woman should be an inspiration to another. So don't be afraid to share yours. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.